She arrived at the military base on a bright morning, her uniform crisp, her backpack heavy with supplies, and her heart full of determination. From the very first moment, she could feel the eyes of the soldiers on her, sizing her up, judging her. Whispers followed her everywhere she went. "She's just a medic," some said, shaking their heads. Others laughed openly, thinking it was amusing that someone like her, calm, quiet, and not as physically imposing as the others, had joined their ranks. She ignored them, though. She had long since learned that words only had power if she allowed them to. Being labeled just a medic wasn't new to her. It had happened before in training exercises in hospitals and even among her peers in other fields. People often underestimated those who focused on healing rather than fighting. But she knew better. She understood that her role wasn't less important, it was just different. And she also understood something else. She was not only going to save lives. She was going to prove that she could be more than anyone expected. Her first days at the base were difficult. The other soldiers didn't include her in conversations about tactics or combat strategies. They assumed she wouldn't understand, or worse, that she wasn't interested. When they lifted weights in the gym or ran obstacle courses, she joined quietly but didn't draw attention. She trained hard, not to show off, but to prepare herself for anything. She wanted to make sure that when the real test came, she would be ready. Despite the mocking and isolation, she watched everything carefully. She observed how soldiers moved in formation, how they communicated during drills, and how they reacted to stress. She paid attention to the commander, noting his style of leadership and the way he made decisions under pressure. Every detail was a lesson, and she absorbed it silently. While others underestimated her, she was quietly learning the skills that could one day save lives, and maybe even change the outcome of a battle. One particular morning, during a routine training session, some of the soldiers decided to make fun of her. "Go treat someone instead of trying to run like a soldier," one of them sneered. She smiled politely, saying nothing. She didn't need to argue. She had a secret confidence, a belief in her own abilities that no taunting could shake. She knew that actions spoke louder than words, and she was waiting for the right moment to show everyone what she was truly capable of. Her dedication didn't go unnoticed by everyone. A few seasoned soldiers and even some of the instructors began to see her potential. They observed how quickly she could react to minor injuries, how calm she remained even when a drill went wrong, and how she anticipated problems before they happened. They recognized that she had a mind not just for healing, but for strategy, observation, and leadership. But these voices of support were few, and the mocking from the majority remained strong. At mealtimes, she sat alone at first, not out of shyness but out of focus. She used the time to plan, to review maps and notes, and to mentally run through scenarios. She imagined herself in situations where lives depended on quick thinking and precise action. She imagined herself leading the team, not just treating the wounded. These thoughts weren't daydreams, they were part of her preparation. Every insult she endured, every smirk she saw, only strengthened her resolve. She turned negativity into fuel, motivation to work harder, learn more, and be ready when the moment came. It wasn't long before small opportunities started to appear. During minor drills, she stepped up to assist teammates who were struggling, not waiting for recognition, but simply because she knew it was necessary. She gave advice quietly, showing insight beyond her years of experience. Even if the others mocked her for speaking up, the commander noticed. He watched her work, quietly impressed by her focus, intelligence, and determination. He didn't say much at first, but his eyes followed her during exercises, marking her as someone different, someone who could handle more than just basic medical duties. By the end of the first week, a subtle shift began to occur. While the soldiers still whispered and joked, there was a growing awareness that she was more than just a medic. She had not tried to prove herself through shouting, fighting, or boasting. Instead, she proved it by being prepared, observant, and calm. Her quiet strength was starting to make a mark, planting seeds of respect in the minds of those around her. Even in the face of mockery, she never lost her focus or her kindness. She treated everyone with respect, even those who doubted her. That balance of humility and confidence made her unique in the eyes of the few who were paying attention. They realized that beneath her calm exterior was someone who could think, act, and lead under pressure. And though no one could have predicted it yet, those seeds of respect and observation were about to grow into something extraordinary, something that would challenge every assumption about her role, skill, and courage. By the end of that first part of her journey, it was clear that she wasn't just surviving the ridicule. She was preparing for the moment when her true abilities would shine. And when that moment came, it wouldn't just surprise her peers. It would shock them, leaving no doubt about her strength, intelligence, and the power of someone who refuses to be underestimated. It was early morning when the alarm sounded across the base. What was supposed to be a simple training exercise suddenly turned into chaos. The soldiers, still half asleep, rushed out of their tents, grabbing their gear and weapons. Confusion spread quickly. No one knew if it was a drill or a real attack. Among them was the medic they once mocked, the one they called just a medic. She tied her hair back, put on her medical vest, and ran toward the noise without hesitation. The sky was filled with dust as smoke bombs exploded in the distance. The commander's voice echoed through the radio, calling everyone to their positions. But something wasn't right. The attack came from an unexpected direction, and several soldiers were caught off guard. Within minutes, a few were already injured. One hit his leg on sharp metal, another tripped and broke his wrist, and someone else was lying unconscious after a fall. Panic started spreading among the team. While everyone shouted orders, she didn't waste a second. Her training kicked in instantly. She rushed to the first injured soldier, her hands moving quickly but calmly. "You're going to be okay," she said softly, wrapping a bandage around his bleeding leg. Then she turned to another, checking his pulse and giving instructions to two others who stood frozen nearby. "Hold his arm steady. Don't move him until I say." Her voice was firm but calm, and somehow, the panic around her began to fade. The commander, watching from a distance, noticed her. While others were confused, she was in control. He could see how she moved, fast, precise, confident. She wasn't just treating wounds. She was leading. She directed soldiers to cover positions, pointed out a safe path for evacuation, and made quick decisions that even some trained officers hesitated to make. In that moment, she became the eye of the storm, calm, sharp, and focused. But not everyone saw it that way. Some of the soldiers still laughed under their breath. "It's just a drill," one muttered. "She's acting like it's war." Another shrugged, saying, "Let her play hero." They didn't realize that her actions were exactly what real heroes did. She wasn't pretending. She was preparing for the real thing. Then the situation took a sudden turn. The training ambush became dangerously realistic. One of the smoke grenades ignited dry grass, and within moments, a small fire started spreading. The air grew thick with smoke, and visibility dropped. The heat made everyone nervous. That's when she saw the commander coughing near the flames, trying to get his team back information. Without thinking twice, she ran through the smoke toward him, covering her mouth with a cloth. "Sir, you need to move back," she shouted. He tried to wave her off, saying he could handle it, but she stood her ground. "If we don't move now, the fire will trap the injured," she said. Her tone wasn't one of fear. It was firm, almost commanding. The commander paused for a second, realizing she was right. He gave the order to retreat 50 meters and regroup. Following her lead, a few soldiers helped carry the injured away from the spreading flames. She guided them step by step, ensuring no one was left behind. When they finally reached safety, she checked every wounded soldier again, making sure they were stable. Sweat covered her face, but her hands never shook. The commander watched her closely. She had taken charge when others hesitated, and it had made all the difference. After the exercise ended, the mood at the base was different. The air of mockery that usually surrounded her began to fade, replaced by quiet respect. The soldiers who had laughed before were now silent, watching her as she cleaned her medical tools and restocked her supplies. No one could deny what they had seen. She didn't just patch wounds. She had managed an emergency with calm leadership. Later that evening, the commander approached her as she sat alone outside the tent, drinking water. He stood there for a moment, then said, "You kept your head today when others didn't. That's something I won't forget." She smiled lightly, not with pride, but with quiet satisfaction. "Just doing my job, sir," she replied. He shook his head and said, "No, you did more than that." Even though she didn't say it aloud, inside she felt a spark of pride. For the first time, someone had seen what she was capable of. Not as a medic, but as a soldier who could think clearly under fire. It wasn't glory she wanted. It was respect, and she had started to earn it the hard way. That night, as the camp settled into silence, she sat under the stars, replaying the day in her mind. She realized that leadership wasn't about rank or recognition, it was about responsibility. When others froze, she acted. When panic took over, she brought calm. And she knew that if this had been a real battle instead of a drill, those same actions could have saved lives. Little did she know, this was just the beginning. The next mission would not be a drill. Soon, her courage would be tested again. But this time, lives would truly be on the line. And when that moment came, the same people who had once laughed at her would have no choice but to follow her lead. For now, though, she rested quietly, knowing deep down that something had changed. The soldiers might not admit it yet, but respect had begun to grow. The medic they had mocked had proven herself under pressure, and it was only the start of her story. Days passed after the intense training incident, and the base slowly returned to its normal routine. The soldiers joked, trained, and followed orders as usual. But something small had changed. When the medic walked by, people didn't laugh as loudly as before. Some even nodded in respect, while others quietly avoided her gaze, maybe a little embarrassed about how they'd treated her before. She didn't care about their opinions, though. She wasn't there for attention. She was there to grow stronger. Every morning before sunrise, she was already awake. While others slept, she sat at her small desk under a dim lamp, reading old field manuals about tactics and survival. Her fingers traced maps, studying every detail, the terrain, the elevation, the routes, and the danger zones. She didn't just want to be good at medicine anymore. She wanted to understand how to fight, how to lead, and how to protect. When dawn came, she joined the rest of the unit for physical training. She ran with them, climbed walls, crawled through mud, and carried heavy packs across rough ground. First, she struggled. Some soldiers laughed again when she fell or slowed down. But each time she fell, she got up stronger. Sweat poured down her face, her muscles ached, but she never stopped. She wasn't trying to prove herself to them anymore. She was proving something to herself. During lunch breaks, when others rested, she stayed back to practice bandaging and first aid drills on dummies. But then, after finishing her medical routines, she did something unexpected. She started practicing weapon handling. At first, the shooting instructor laughed. "A medic with a gun?" he teased. "What are you planning to do? Shoot bandages at the enemy?" She smiled politely and said nothing. She simply picked up the weapon and began practicing, slowly, carefully, learning every detail of its weight, balance, and trigger pressure. She missed her target several times that day, but she stayed until evening, firing again and again until the shots hit closer and closer to the center. The instructor, who had mocked her earlier, stopped laughing by the end. "You've got patience," he said, almost surprised. She smiled again. "Patience is part of the job," she replied, loading another round. In the evenings, after everyone else was done, she went to the field to watch soldiers rehearse tactical maneuvers. She wasn't required to be there. It wasn't part of her duty, but she wanted to learn. She stood quietly behind a jeep, studying how the commander gave orders, how troops covered each other, how they retreated and advanced. Every move fascinated her. She started making notes in a small notebook she kept hidden in her pocket: plans, formations, emergency responses, ideas for how she could help during real combat. Some nights, when the camp lights dimmed, she stayed up late with a flashlight, going over those notes. The sound of the desert wind outside mixed with the rustling of paper. She didn't know when she would need this knowledge, but she had a feeling deep in her heart that one day, it would matter. One day, she might need to step beyond her role as a medic. There were moments of loneliness, of course. Being dedicated came at a cost. She had few friends, and most people didn't understand why she worked so hard. Some whispered behind her back, calling her too serious, or saying she was trying too hard to be a hero. But she didn't let their words reach her heart. She knew that effort and consistency always spoke louder than gossip. One late evening, as she was practicing map reading under a lantern, the commander passed by and stopped. "You're still awake?" he asked. She stood and saluted quickly. "Yes, sir," she replied. "Just reviewing the mission area." He frowned, a little confused. "That's not part of your duty, medic." She hesitated, then said softly, "I just want to understand how everything connects, sir. If I know the terrain, I can plan better for evacuations, and maybe help in more ways than one." The commander studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "That's good thinking," he said. "Most people only do what they're told. You're preparing for more." He turned and walked away, leaving her smiling to herself. It was a small moment, but to her it meant everything. Someone finally saw her effort, not as ambition, but as dedication. As weeks went by, her reputation quietly began to change. When new recruits arrived, they didn't hear stories of a weak medic. They heard about a woman who had saved men during a fire, who trained harder than most soldiers, and who never gave up. Some started asking her for advice, not only about injuries but about how to stay calm under pressure. She answered everyone with kindness and patience, just as she always did. Even though respect was growing, she didn't stop pushing herself. She started joining small tactical teams during drills, practicing communication under pressure. Her voice, once ignored, now carried authority in emergencies. The soldiers who had once doubted her now listened when she spoke. Slowly, she was becoming not just a medic, but a reliable figure the team could trust. Every night, when she looked at her reflection in the mirror, she saw the change too. The timid, quiet medic was gone. Her eyes now carried confidence and purpose. She had transformed herself through effort, patience, and belief. But somewhere deep inside, she still felt that her real test hadn't come yet. All this learning, all this training, it felt like preparation for something much bigger, something dangerous, something real. And she was right, because soon a new mission would arrive. A mission that would push her beyond every limit she had faced so far. It would be the moment when her knowledge, courage, and strength would all be tested in the heat of battle. The moment when everyone would finally see who she truly was, not just a medic, but a warrior in every sense. The sun burned hot over the desert base when the news came in. A new mission had been assigned. It wasn't just another training or supply run. This was real. The enemy had moved closer to a nearby village, and the commander's unit was chosen to secure the area and rescue civilians who were trapped. Everyone in the camp could feel the tension. This was going to be dangerous. The soldiers prepared quickly, checking their weapons and gear. Laughter and jokes that usually filled the air were gone. Instead, there was a heavy silence. For many of them, it was the first real mission outside training grounds. Every face looked serious. Even the most confident soldiers seemed nervous. The medic, now more respected than before, stood near the supply truck, carefully organizing her medical kit. Bandages, morphine, saline, tools. She double-checked everything, making sure she was ready for anything. She had done this many times before, but today felt different. She could sense something heavy in the air, something dangerous. Still, her hands were steady. When the commander walked past, he paused beside her. "You'll be joining us," he said. She looked up, surprised. "Me, sir?" "In the field." The commander nodded. "We need a medic with us in case of injury. You've proven yourself ready." For a second, she felt a mixture of fear and pride. She had wanted this moment, to prove herself beyond the safe walls of the base. But now that it was here, her heart pounded fast. Still, she took a deep breath, looked him in the eye, and said firmly, "Understood, sir. I'll be ready." The next morning before sunrise, the team gathered by the armored vehicles. The air was cold and quiet. She climbed into the back seat with her bag resting on her lap. Some of the soldiers glanced at her but said nothing. Their earlier laughter and teasing were gone, replaced with something like trust, or maybe curiosity. As the convoy moved out, the desert stretched endlessly before them, golden and harsh. Dust trailed behind the vehicles as they moved closer to enemy territory. Inside, the medic sat still, thinking about everything she had learned. Every drill, every late-night study session, every time she had been laughed at, it all led to this moment. Hours later, the radio crackled with static. "Enemy movement spotted ahead," a voice said. The commander immediately ordered the convoy to stop. Everyone disembarked quietly, crouching low. The medic followed, her heart racing but her mind sharp. She checked her surroundings, memorizing the escape paths and possible cover. She wasn't just there to heal. She was there to think, to act, and to survive. The team moved cautiously through the broken buildings of the village. The silence was eerie, broken only by the sound of boots on the ground. Suddenly a loud crack echoed, a gunshot, then another. Before they could react, bullets flew from the rooftops. "Ambush!" someone shouted. The soldiers ducked for cover, returning fire. Chaos erupted. The medic immediately dropped behind a wall, her instincts taking over. A soldier nearby was hit in the arm, blood pouring fast. Without hesitation, she crawled over, pulling him behind cover. "Stay with me," she said, pressing a bandage tightly over the wound. Bullets struck the ground nearby, dust flying into her face. She didn't flinch. Her voice stayed calm as she worked quickly, saving his arm and his life in the middle of a firefight. The commander, shouting orders a few meters away, saw her. He couldn't believe how fearless she was. When a grenade landed close to the group, she reacted instantly, dragging the wounded soldier out of the blast range before it exploded. The sound was deafening, but she didn't stop. She returned to help another man who had fallen. The battle went on for minutes that felt like hours. The team was pinned down, unable to move forward. Communication was breaking. That's when the commander realized they needed to reposition, but the path ahead was blocked. He called for a volunteer to circle around the side. Before he could finish speaking, the medic spoke up. "Sir, I know a path," she said, pointing to a narrow alley she had noticed earlier. "It leads behind the enemy position. I studied the map before we left. It's risky, but it can work." The commander hesitated. Sending a medic into danger went against every rule. But looking at her eyes, steady, focused, confident, he knew she wasn't afraid. "All right," he said. "Lead the way." She nodded and took point, signaling the others to follow. They moved quietly through the alley, hearts pounding. The narrow path opened behind the enemy's cover. From there, the commander and his men launched a surprise counterattack, catching the attackers off guard. Within minutes, the gunfire stopped. The ambush was over. When the dust settled, everyone took a deep breath. The team had survived, and much of that was because of her quick thinking. Soldiers she had saved earlier looked at her with gratitude and awe. The commander walked up to her, a faint smile breaking through his tired expression. "Good call, medic," he said. She smiled faintly back. "Just doing my job, sir." As they returned to the vehicles, the sun began to set, painting the sky in red and gold. The medic sat quietly, wiping blood. Some of it hers, some from the men she'd treated, from her gloves. For the first time, no one saw her as just a medic. She was one of them now, a true soldier who had fought, planned, and led under fire. That night, back at the base, stories of her courage spread quickly. Some called her the calm in chaos. Others said she was born for the battlefield. But she didn't think of herself as a hero. To her, it was simple. When lives were on the line, she did what needed to be done. Still, deep inside, she knew this mission was only the beginning. The real test was yet to come. The next battle would push her even further, beyond courage, beyond fear, into a place where only true leaders stood. And when that day came, she would once again show everyone who she really was. The night after the mission was quiet, but inside the base, Everyone could feel the tension building. The success in the last operation had given them hope, but it also made the enemy angry. Scouts soon brought bad news. A larger enemy force was moving toward their sector. The next fight wouldn't be small. It would be war. The commander called a meeting with his team. The medic stood at the back of the room, listening carefully as he spoke. "We've received new orders," he said firmly. "We'll move out at dawn to reinforce the front line. The enemy has surrounded one of our forward posts, and they're losing men fast." His eyes moved across the room. "This mission is dangerous. There's no guarantee of safety. I need every one of you ready." The room went silent for a moment. Every soldier knew what that meant. Some might not come back. But no one stepped back. When the meeting ended, the medic walked to her quarters to prepare. Her hands trembled slightly as she packed her medical kit, but she took a deep breath and steadied herself. Fear was normal. She had learned that courage wasn't about not feeling fear, but about acting in spite of it. The next morning, the convoy left under the dark blue light of dawn. The air was thick with dust, and the vehicles moved fast across the open land. The medic sat quietly in the back, checking her supplies again and again. Around her, soldiers tried to joke to calm their nerves, but no one really laughed. Everyone knew this mission was serious. Hours later, the first sounds of battle reached them. Distant explosions, gunfire echoing in the hills. The commander gave the signal to stop. "We go on foot from here," he said. The team moved out, crouching low, rifles ready. The medic followed closely behind the commander, her eyes scanning the ground for signs of danger. When they finally reached the forward post, the scene was worse than they expected. Smoke filled the air, and injured soldiers were lying everywhere. The enemy's attack had been brutal. Without waiting for orders, the medic ran to the nearest wounded man. "You're going to be okay," she said firmly, pressing bandages on his wound. Her movements were quick, confident, practiced. But before she could finish, a sharp sound tore through the air. A sniper's shot. The bullet hit a wall just inches away from her. Dust sprayed her face. For a second, everyone froze. The commander shouted, "Sniper! Get to cover!" Soldiers scattered behind rocks and broken vehicles. But the medic didn't run far. She crawled to another injured soldier lying in the open. "You'll be fine," she whispered, pulling him out of the danger zone with all her strength. Bullets hit the ground around her, but she didn't stop. Her bravery lit a spark in the others. Seeing her risking her life to save someone, the soldiers began firing back, covering her as she worked. She gave orders with a strong voice. "Bandage him here. Keep pressure on that wound. Move him behind that wall." Even the commander followed her lead for a moment. The fighting grew worse. Enemy forces pushed closer, and communication lines were breaking. The commander tried to call for reinforcements, but the signal was weak. Then, an explosion ripped through a nearby truck. The blast threw the commander to the ground. When the dust cleared, he wasn't moving. "Commander down!" someone shouted. Panic spread like fire. Without the commander, the soldiers hesitated, unsure what to do next. The enemy was advancing fast, and they were trapped. That's when the medic looked up, her heart pounding. For a brief moment, fear tried to take hold of her. But then she remembered every lesson she had learned. Every night she had prepared for this. She stood up, shouting over the chaos. "Listen to me. We need to move the wounded to the east side, near the rocks. That's our cover." Her voice cut through the noise. The soldiers turned toward her, shocked by her sudden command. "You heard her," one of them shouted back. In seconds, everyone began following her lead. She crawled to the commander and checked his pulse. He was alive, but barely conscious. "Stay with me, sir," she whispered. "We're getting you out." With help from two others, she lifted him and began dragging him toward the east, bullets flying overhead. Sweat and dirt covered her face, but her focus never broke. As they moved, she kept giving orders. "Cover that flank! Move faster! Don't stop!" Her voice carried strength, and slowly the team regained control. Under her direction, They created a defensive position behind the rocks, treating the injured while holding back the attackers. After what felt like hours, the sound of gunfire finally began to fade. Reinforcements arrived, pushing the enemy back. The battle was over. The medic collapsed beside the commander, her arms trembling from exhaustion. But when she looked around, she saw something she would never forget. Every man in her unit looking at her with respect and gratitude. The commander, weak but conscious now, opened his eyes and met hers. You led them," he said softly, his voice rough. She shook her head. "I just did what had to be done." He smiled faintly. "No, you did what a leader does." For a moment, she didn't know what to say. The words filled her heart with pride, but also with humility. She hadn't done it for recognition. She had done it because people's lives depended on her. When they finally returned to base that night, word of her bravery spread quickly. Soldiers from other units came to thank her. They no longer saw her as just a medic. They saw her as someone who had saved their commander and their team under fire. She had become a symbol of courage, proof that true strength doesn't always come from weapons, but from heart, skill, and the will to act when it matters most. But deep inside, she knew this wasn't the end of her journey. There would be more battles ahead, more lives to save, and more challenges to face. She had led through fire once, and she was ready to do it again if it meant protecting her people. The sun was setting behind the hills when the team finally made it back to base. Everyone was covered in dust and exhaustion, but they were alive, because of her. The medic who once sat quietly at the back of the group had become the reason the entire team returned home. Yet, there was no celebration that night. The battlefield still echoed in their minds. The gunfire, the screams, the sight of fallen friends. The commander was taken to the medical tent immediately. He had lost a lot of blood, and the medic refused to rest until he was stable. Her hands moved quickly, wrapping bandages and checking his vitals. Hours passed, but she didn't stop. Sweat dripped down her forehead, her arms ached, but she kept working. Finally, when the commander opened his eyes weakly and whispered, "You did it," she allowed herself to take a deep breath. For a moment, she felt relief. But deep inside, she knew this wasn't over. The war around them was far from finished. The next day brought new orders. Enemy forces were regrouping, and the base could be attacked at any time. The soldiers started preparing for defense. That evening, as everyone worked, she stood near the edge of the camp, watching the horizon. The air smelled of dust and smoke. Her heart was heavy, but her mind was calm. She had faced fear once and survived. She could do it again. What she didn't know was that the next battle would test her more than ever before. Late that night, when most of the camp was quiet, an explosion suddenly ripped through the darkness. The ground shook, alarms blared, and everyone jumped to their feet. The enemy had attacked under the cover of night. Bullets tore through the air as soldiers scrambled for cover. The medic grabbed her kit and ran toward the noise. The scene was chaos. Fires burned near the supply trucks, and smoke filled the air. Injured soldiers shouted for help. The commander, still recovering, tried to stand but collapsed. Without hesitation, she rushed to him. "You can't move," she said firmly. "Let me handle this." But he grabbed her arm and whispered, "They need leadership." She nodded, knowing he was right. She turned to the panicking soldiers and shouted, "Everyone, listen to me. Get the wounded behind the sandbags. Use the vehicles as cover." Her voice cut through the noise. The soldiers obeyed instantly. She ran from one end of the camp to the other, helping to drag the injured to safety, throwing water on small fires, and shouting directions as if she'd been leading troops her whole life. The enemy fire grew stronger. One of the fuel tanks caught fire, sending flames high into the sky. "We have to move the commander now," someone yelled. Without thinking twice, she and two soldiers lifted the commander onto a stretcher. Bullets whizzed past them as they ran through smoke and fire. Her lungs burned, but she didn't slow down. Every step felt heavier, but she refused to stop. As they neared the safe zone, another explosion hit nearby, knocking them to the ground. The commander groaned in pain. She quickly shielded him with her body as debris rained down around them. When the dust settled, she opened her eyes. The fire was spreading fast, and they were trapped between flames and falling debris. She looked around desperately, trying to find a way out. Then she saw a narrow path through the wreckage, a small gap between two burning trucks. "This way!" she shouted. The soldiers hesitated. The fire was intense, the heat unbearable. "Trust me," she yelled again, her voice full of command. Without waiting for a reply, she grabbed the stretcher and led the way through the fire. Flames licked at her uniform, and the air was thick with smoke, but she didn't stop. Each step felt like walking through a nightmare. The commander coughed weakly, and she said through the smoke, "Just a little more, sir. We're almost there." Her throat burned, her vision blurred, but she pushed on. Finally, they burst through the other side, collapsing in the dirt away from the flames. The fresh air hit her face, and she coughed hard, her lungs aching. The other soldiers helped her lay the commander down in a safer area. For a moment, everything went silent except the distant sounds of gunfire. She looked back toward the camp, now glowing orange from the fires, and saw soldiers still fighting. She wanted to rest, but she couldn't. Not yet. She stood up again, ignoring the pain in her legs, and ran back into the chaos. She helped drag out two more injured men, bandaging one of them while giving cover directions to the others. Every move she made was driven by pure willpower. Hours later, as dawn began to break, the enemy finally retreated. The attack had been fierce, but the base had survived. And much of that survival was because of her. When the smoke cleared, soldiers looked around, exhausted, bruised, but alive. Then their eyes turned to the medic, who sat on the ground beside the commander. Her hands burned, her face covered in soot, her uniform torn. The commander, now conscious again, looked at her with pride. "You led them through fire," he said quietly. She gave a tired smile. "We all made it, sir," she replied softly. The soldiers gathered around her. No one called her just a medic anymore. They called her the one who saved the commander. Some even called her the Iron Medic. But she didn't care about titles. For her, the victory was seeing everyone alive. Later that day, as the camp was repaired and new orders came in, she finally sat alone for a while, staring at the burned ground where she had run through fire. She thought about how far she had come, from being mocked and ignored to leading men through the worst night of their lives. She realized that true courage wasn't about medals or glory. It was about doing the right thing when everything around you was falling apart. And even though her body ached, her spirit was stronger than ever. She had dragged the commander through fire, saved lives, and earned respect not by shouting or showing off, but by proving her worth with action. And deep in her heart, she knew one thing for sure. This was her purpose. She was no longer just a medic. She was a fighter, a leader, and a symbol of hope in the darkest moments of war. Days passed after the night of fire, but the memory of that chaos stayed in everyone's mind. The base was being repaired, tents rebuilt, weapons checked, and burned vehicles pushed aside. The smell of smoke still lingered in the air. Everyone moved slower now, not from laziness but from exhaustion. They had survived, but the war wasn't over. The medic, the same woman who once sat quietly and listened to jokes made about her, was now the center of quiet respect. Wherever she walked, soldiers nodded their heads. Some of them, the same ones who used to mock her, now asked for her advice. They had seen her courage, the way she ran into the fire, the way she refused to leave anyone behind. To them, she was more than just a medic now. She was one of their heroes, but she didn't see herself that way. She never wanted fame or praise. Every time someone thanked her, she just smiled softly and said, "I was just doing my duty." Deep inside, though, she carried the heavy weight of all she had seen. The pain, the fear, and the near loss of her commander. Even when she smiled, her eyes showed that she was still fighting a silent battle within. The commander was recovering slowly. His injuries were healing, but he couldn't forget how she had saved his life. He called her to his tent one evening. When she walked in, he said quietly, You risked everything out there. You led men when I couldn't. You've proven something that no rank or medal could ever measure." She looked down and replied, "Sir, I only did what had to be done." The commander smiled faintly. "And that's exactly why you're different," he said. Then he handed her something small, a silver badge. "You've earned this," he said. "Not for following orders, but for giving hope when everyone else lost it." She looked at the badge in silence, her heart full. She didn't need it to know her worth, but it meant something. It was proof that her courage had finally been seen. Just when things started to feel calm, new orders arrived. The commander gathered everyone and said, "We're being moved to the front line again. The enemy is preparing for a large offensive. This time we'll be right in the middle of it." The news hit the soldiers hard. Many looked worried. Some were still not fully recovered from the last attack. The medic stood among them, her heart steady. Fear was natural, but she had learned to live with it. She stepped forward and said, "We've been through worse and survived. We'll get through this too." Her words gave strength to the tired soldiers. For the first time, they didn't just look at her as a medic. They looked at her as a leader. That night, before the move, she sat quietly outside the camp, cleaning her tools and checking her gear. The stars were bright, but her thoughts were heavy. She thought about the people she had saved, and the ones she couldn't. War had taught her that courage was not the absence of fear. It was moving forward despite it. When the morning came, the convoy rolled out. The desert wind blew across their faces as they moved toward the front. The commander sat in one vehicle, still weak but determined, while she rode in another, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She could feel it. Something big was coming. Hours later, they reached a small village that had been caught in the crossfire. Buildings were half destroyed, and the smell of gunpowder filled the air. Civilians were hiding, frightened and hungry. Without waiting for orders, she jumped into action. "Get the medical tents up," she shouted. "We treat the wounded here." The soldiers followed her lead without question. For 2 days straight, she worked without rest. She treated injured villagers, soldiers, even enemy fighters who were captured alive. Her compassion knew no sides. To her, a life was a life. Some soldiers were surprised. "You're helping the enemy?" one asked. She simply replied, "Pain has no uniform." Those words spread across the camp like wildfire. Even the commander heard about it and said quietly to his officers, "That's what true strength looks like." On the third night, the sound of distant gunfire returned. Scouts reported that the enemy was closing in fast. The soldiers braced themselves again, but this time, something was different. They weren't afraid like before. They had seen what their medic was capable of. She had turned fear into courage. When the attack began, she didn't hide behind safety. She stayed right in the middle of the action, moving from one wounded soldier to another. Bullets flew past. Explosions lit up the night, but her focus never broke. "Stay with me," she shouted to one bleeding soldier as she wrapped his arm. "You're not dying today." Even under fire, she guided others, telling snipers where to take position, helping engineers fix radio lines, and calming panicked men. She had become the heart of the team. Every man fought harder because they knew she was there, the medic who never ran, the one who had walked through fire. Hours later, when the firing stopped and silence filled the air, the soldiers realized they had done it. The enemy was pushed back. The base was safe. Cheers broke out, and some soldiers even hugged her, tears in their eyes. One of them said, "You didn't just save lives, you saved our courage." She smiled faintly, tired but proud. Her hands were covered in blood. Not hers, but those she had saved. The commander approached her, leaning on a crutch. "You led them again," he said quietly. "Not with weapons, but with bravery." She looked at him and replied softly, "We all led each other, sir. That's how we survived." As the dawn broke over the battlefield, the medic stood silently, watching the sun rise through the smoke. She knew there would be more battles ahead, more pain, more challenges. But she also knew something deeper. She wasn't just a medic anymore. She had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in war, humanity still burns brighter than fire. The war was finally slowing down. Weeks had passed since the last big battle, and the soldiers were tired but alive. The base was quieter now. No gunfire, no explosions, only the sound of the wind blowing through torn tents and the distant hum of vehicles. The medic, the woman everyone once called just a medic, sat outside the field hospital, watching the sun set beyond the dusty hills. Her uniform was faded, her hands rough from endless work, but her eyes were calm. She had seen too much, survived too much, and changed more than she ever imagined. Inside the medical tent, the commander was resting. His wounds had healed, but he often said he owed his life to her. He had told her many times that she wasn't just part of the team. She was the reason the team had survived. But she never took the credit. To her, it was never about being a hero. It was about saving one more life every day. That evening, as the sun disappeared, a new order came through the radio. The war was officially over in their region. The soldiers looked at each other in silence, as if they couldn't believe it. Some smiled, some cried, some just sat quietly. For years, their lives had been nothing but battle and loss. And now, finally, there was peace. The commander gathered everyone for a final briefing. His voice was softer than usual, full of emotion. "We came here as soldiers," he said, "but we're leaving as survivors. We've lost brothers and sisters, but we've also found strength we didn't know we had." Then he looked directly at her. "And one of us showed what real courage looks like." All eyes turned toward her. She stood there, unsure of what to say. "I only did my job," she said quietly. But the soldiers shook their heads. One of them spoke up. "You did more than your job. You led us when everything was falling apart. You kept us alive." The group fell silent, and for the first time, she saw in their faces something she had never seen before: true respect. The next morning, the unit began packing up. Trucks were loaded, tents were taken down, and the once busy base began to look empty. The medic moved through the area slowly, helping where she could, saying goodbye to the local villagers she had treated, and checking one last time that no wounded were left behind. Before leaving, she walked to the spot near the old fire line, the same place where she had dragged the commander through the flames months ago. The ground was blackened, but small green shoots were growing between the ashes. She knelt down, touched the earth, and smiled faintly. Life always found a way to come back, no matter how much destruction there had been. When the convoy finally started moving, she sat in the back of a truck, looking out at the land that had changed her forever. Memories flooded her mind. The laughter of soldiers before battle, the screams in the night, the endless hours of treating the wounded, and the faces of those she couldn't save. Her heart was heavy, but not with regret. She had done everything she could. As they reached the main base for debriefing, a small crowd of officers was waiting. The commander stepped forward and saluted her in front of everyone. Then, to her surprise, he handed her a small box. Inside was a medal, the kind usually given for bravery in combat. The commander said, "You carried the wounded through fire. You led men when your commander was down. You gave courage when others had none. This medal isn't just for saving my life. It's for saving all of ours." The camp fell silent. She stood there, staring at the medal in her hand. It shimmered in the sunlight, but she didn't see it as a prize. She saw it as a reminder of every drop of sweat, every life she had held in her hands, and every tear she had hidden behind her strength. She saluted the commander and said softly, "Thank you, sir. But the real heroes are the ones who never came back." After the ceremony, she walked alone near the medical tents. Some new recruits were arriving, young and full of energy, just like she once was. One of them noticed her and whispered to another, "That's her, the medic who saved the commander." The words made her smile, but she also felt a deep sense of responsibility. She knew that stories like hers were not about glory, but about reminding others that kindness and courage could exist even in the darkest times. In the days that followed, she finally got the chance to rest. She wrote letters to the families of the soldiers she had treated, telling them their loved ones had fought bravely. Each letter was written with care, with a little piece of her heart in every word. She wanted them to know that even in war, compassion had never been lost. When her duty ended and it was time to return home, she looked at the camp one last time. The place that once filled her with fear was now a memory of strength. As the truck drove away, she watched the base disappear in the distance, knowing that part of her would always remain there. Back in her hometown, she lived a quiet life. People often asked her about the war, but she rarely talked about it. When she did, she never mentioned medals or battles. She spoke about the people, the friendships, the laughter, and the small moments of hope that made the suffering bearable. Sometimes, she visited schools and told young students about courage. Courage, she would say, is not about being fearless. It's about standing tall even when you're scared. It's about helping others when everyone else runs away. Her eyes would shine when she said those words, because she had lived them. Years later, stories of her bravery still spread among soldiers. Some called her the angel of the front line. Others called her the fire medic. But she never cared about the name. To her, being a medic was not just a role, it was her promise to humanity. She had gone to war as someone others underestimated, but she came back as someone who had changed lives. Her story became a lesson that true strength isn't found in weapons or ranks, but in compassion, courage, and the will to never give up. And though she would never say it herself, everyone who knew her agreed. She wasn't just a medic. She was a warrior with a healer's heart, the one who led her commander through fire and came out stronger than flames themselves.